Hello, everyone. Welcome to Toil and Trouble, panel 1 on modernizing witchcraft and the occult. I am your host, Kelly of the Spinsters of Horror, and though I may not be a witch, I do fall into the archetype of one. Today, we will be discussing topics inspired by the book Toil and Trouble, A Woman's History of the Occult, such as women's place in the history of the occult and witchcraft, its representation in film and television, and how social media impacts people's daily craft. Is it helpful? Is it harmful? We'll chat about that today. So, first off, I'm going to start introducing our wonderful guest panelists today, but starting with Lisa Kroger, who is the co-author of the book Toil and Trouble, A Woman's History of the Occult. She's also an active member of the Horror Writers Association and a core member of the NYX Horror Collective, a group focused on women-centered genre content for film, television, and new media. She's a winner of the Bram Stoker Award and the Locus Awards. She is also the co-author of Monster, She Wrote, as well as a co-host of the No Fear and Monster, She Wrote podcasts. I don't know why, mouthful there. So busy, so wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And then next up, we have KT. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So KT is a film critic on hiatus and is also a co-host of the war film podcast Danger Close. They have been an on again, off again practicing pagan since her teen years, and they love to talk about film, mythology, and binging weird psychedelic stories. Hello again.
Hi.
Hi. And then our remaining panelist, who was supposed to be the host, but now she's an excellent expertise person today. And this is Jess. She is, we all know her, but she is of also the Spinsters of Horror, and she is our resident witch. So she's a co-host of the podcast, I Spit on Your Podcast. She's a regular contributor to the Last Girls Club magazine and has written editorials for Grimm magazine as well as Horror Homeroom. As a practicing solitary witch, she has found empowerment in the occult and witchcraft and is passionate about the history of the practitioners who have come before her. So here we are, Yay. Our esteemed guests, our illustrious guests. So thank you so much for joining us today. And so how things are going to run for those that are watching, we're going to have a bunch of questions for our panelists. And we're going to save about 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. So if folks, you have any burning witchcraft, either in practice or in film and television questions, save those to the end.
All right. Well, once again, thank you everyone for being here. Our guest, our host Kelly, for stepping in, as well as anyone who's joining us now watching. And yeah, this panel itself was inspired by the book Toil and Trouble, which Lisa is a co-author with her co-author with Melanie Anderson, who will be on tomorrow's panel on witchcraft and empowerment. And I read this book, and you could probably see that I have all kinds of notes in it. And it was actually a book that was on my Amazon wish list. So when we got asked to read and talk about this, I was like, yes, 100%, I want to talk about this book. So the book Toil and Trouble really gives us insight into different women and non-binary individuals who have made significant impact in the occult and also in witchcraft. People such as Helen Peters Noseworthy, the Public Universal Friend, Pamela Coleman Smith, Doreen Valentine, Harriet E. Wilson, Laura Cabot, Elvira, Vampira. Like, you guys covered the gambit of important individuals to the occult and witchcraft that are not men. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that men are a bad thing. It's just often, especially someone who's a practicing witch who's very interested in the history of witchcraft, it's really interesting to find out these women's stories and these individual stories, because they're often usually like a footnote in a lot of old books. And so one of my first questions, and it was like a burning question the entire time I was reading the book, was when you were researching and writing the book, was there anyone else that you came across that you wanted to talk about more, explore more, go further in depth with? And that's questions for you, Lisa.
Absolutely. It was the same problem that Melanie and I encountered when we did Monster, She Wrote, because we end up with something that could probably fill 10 books with the names, and our editor will like look at our list of people we want to talk about and be like, oh no, we have to cut this down a lot. And I think the problem with something like this, like the kind of books that we've been working on, is that each person could probably carry a full biography. So a lot does get cut. Part of that is because, as you said, the history just isn't there. You know, we have to go through footnotes, look at newspaper articles, just like hope to find anything on this person that we want to talk about. So we don't often find a lot. Now, in this book in particular, I really wanted to go more into some of the film representations and TV representations of witches, because I think it's so important when you're talking about because we were specifically looking at the culture of the United States being primarily like a Christian patriarchal culture, how that views the occult and what that means for women in the space. And so I would have loved to look at more kind of pop culture representations, because I think it tells us a lot about how people are feeling at the time period towards women, especially, but also to see how the times have kind of changed in how we perceive it. So that, for me, I really wanted to go into more of the women creating in the pop culture space. That will have to be a different book because there's just wasn't a space for that. But that was, for me, what I wanted to do.
Oh my goodness, that would be a great book to also have, because when I was reading this book, as someone, like, I'm very interested in the history of like all kinds of traditions, like pagan, witchcraft, the occult, and stuff like that. But also, like, over the last couple of years, I've been wanting to know more about the people, the individuals, and why, and like how the occult and witchcraft and all of these elements have impacted them and how they impacted other people's lives. Because I'm finding it's very important, not just for my craft, but understanding everyone else's craft, why they're inspired and what motivates them, and who, who treaded that path before them. Because I find in a lot of like beginning books about witchcraft or the occult, you get like little short introductions about like, well, this person did this, and you're like, oh, cool, like, but you never really get to go further unless you start doing research on your own. I'm like, oh, understanding the history of like the tarot, right? Like knowing that how Pamela Coleman Smith was like, she did all those illustrations, and for so long, she didn't get the recognition she deserved for what she put into her magic and her everything into those illustrations. And so I think this book is really great for people like getting into it, and people who want to revisit those biographies again, those individuals. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, talking about pop culture, film, and television, that's a great segue into, furthering discussion about that. So when it comes to good film and television representation of witches, we are still very far behind. I mean, again, I'm not a witch, but I love witchy things. I also like learning about it. I love watching the movies. Prior to jumping on, we're all gushing over The Witch, one of my favorite horror movies of all time as well. So we're still far behind. So my question to my panelists here, my guests here today, why do you think that is? Why do you think that good representation, good balanced, diverse representation is still very far behind? Maybe I'll start with you, Katie.
Oh, I think the easier answer is patriarchy. Of course, patriarchy hurts us all. And I think especially in this country where cinema and film is such a big export for us, like many countries, most countries have a filmic tradition, but in America, it's kind of it reigns king, if you will, literally king, because women do not get as much of an opportunity to tell their stories. I've done a writing about this, about female directors, how few there are in comparison to male directors. And I think that is a big part of it, is women and non-binary people not getting to tell their stories. And like we were talking about The Witch, like I think Robert Eggers did such a great job as a man telling a story that, not for everybody, but in my mind is kind of empowering if you know anything about the that era. So, and I think we're just stuck, and audiences want to see it, I think, but I think studios aren't interested in taking that risk, especially right now with this rise in Christian extremism. I think there's a lot of concern with taking that on in anything but like horror or as the bad. You know, if you can't interpret this as being negative, I think it's hard to get something made, personally.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Lisa?
Yeah, I was just looking up to make sure my numbers were right. But there is a great website to go to called, well, it's the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. And every year at the end of the year, they do this research on just how inclusive Hollywood is and how good they are at, or at how bad, depending on how you're looking at it. At just getting projects made by different voices. And unfortunately, one thing that we're still seeing is that, you know, we do have a lot of people in the top positions in Hollywood who are white and male and straight. And and that's just the way, and not that they make bad movies or TV, because we were, again, talking about The Witch that we love. But I think that's part of the issue, is that if you want to see diverse representations that do a good job at portraying issues that are different than what we see, then you have to get different voices in there. And so, like, I just looked it up, and it was something like, when you look at who is being promoted, for instance, it is still 80% white men versus 20% of BIPOC people working in the industry, which in 2020, that was 2022. So we're not doing a great job there.
Yeah.
Problems everywhere. Jess, I know you have thoughts about, you know, another satanic panic on the rise.
Well, yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts jumping off both from Katie and Lisa's points there. But to go back, yes, we are kind of sitting in a time where there's like another satanic panic on the rise. Like, people still are still misunderstanding the occult and witchcraft or voodoo or anyone's spiritual practices, because they're often associated with this idea of Satan as evil, and it's still very like the representation on TV is still very like Eurocentric and very white still. We're not getting that diversity of traditions and practices of individuals involved in creating more of a diverse outlook or world representation of just people finding power and empowerment in the occult, witchcraft. I kind of want to say like the broad term magic, or just anything that's other, anything that is different. But you know, we're seeing, and then like, and I said, like, the representation that I've been seeing, I'm always sometimes conflicted, because I'm just like, yeah, this is awesome, like female empowerment, like we're having more of these discussions. But then when you see elements of it so connected to Satan, and then they're like, well, of course now the Christian right's going to come after us and be like, well, okay, well, you guys are worshiping the devil, and we're like, yeah, this is a concept. We don't view this as an actual evil figure that is going to ruin our lives. We're actually seeing liberation and empowerment through this, and voices, and because we're not really being heard, we're not being taken care of, so this is how we're trying to work to empower ourselves. And I feel that film is it's getting better. Like, I want to say, like, it isn't as bad as it was once before, right? Where back in like the 70s, anytime we saw witches on the screen, they were being burned, they were like, you know, sexy and, you know, devilish, and like, yeah, we still kind of see it now, but then I feel like there's also more nuance that's coming out, and things are more complicated. Like we're saying earlier, The Witch, Thomason is a very nuanced character, very complicated, and she's really an embodiment of what women were going through during that time, and how dominant religion is. And yeah, it still heavily impacts film in American society, because, you know, the Hays Code was just ended, like, you know, not even in like the 60s. I think it was like the 60s that the Hays Code was finally about, right? That's not like, really, that's not that long ago.
No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, talking about film, I know Lisa wanted to bring up a certain film, so we'll kind of focus around on that, and that is The Craft from 1996. So now we're going to chat about its importance and influence on, though it came out in the 90s, more modern witchcraft and the occult representation. You know, we can chat about good and bad. And I mean, I love this movie. It definitely was a seminal film for me growing up. It's still, for me, a very important movie for like sisterhood and friendship. I take a lot of positives still out of that movie. But yes, Lisa, why don't you get us into chatting about The Craft, every teenage girl's favorite movie?
It is, and for good reason, because I think it's well, just like personally for me, because that was a seminal horror film for me as well. Like, it wasn't the first one. I saw The Exorcist way too young.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I feel like
So
that's
many
a
of them.
common like story, is we all saw something way inappropriate too young, and then we
For me,
got
it was
hooked.
Pet Cemetery.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
another one.
Yeah. But the Craft was one of those that I saw at like just the right time in my life, and because I was a teenager, and we don't often get movies where we get to see the teenage girl just not only have power, but just blatantly want power. Like, that's what they wanted. They wanted to go out, they wanted to find power, and they did. And I think it was also really nuanced in the way it dealt with the handling of that too. Because of course, like the whole binding of Nancy and her powers, and what's good and what's bad. So it really kind of complicated that. I don't think it's a perfect film, and that's probably, we can talk about some of those things, but I just think giving teenage girls that power, and it also, I think, kind of resists the quote unquote strong female character, which I also dislike a lot in film, because a lot of times when writers say they're writing a strong female character, they mean strong in a very kind of male centered way.
Mhm.
And in this way, I felt it was different for each character, which felt very real for me. And I appreciate that they had, I'm not a practitioner of Wicca, but I appreciate that they had at least a consultant on set to kind of help them. It made it, again, there are flaws in it, but it made it, I think, a step towards something more real than what we got in the past. So, I mean, those are just a few of the things I liked about it, but I will always have a soft spot.
Yeah, I wonder how many films or television shows do actually get that consultant on board, which I think is why The Craft feels, to me anyways, very authentic. There is just like this feel of authenticity and, like you said, the realness of it. And I think that's why, one of the many reasons why I think it spoke to me as a teenager. And I'm like, I'm going to be a witch. Yeah, I want to do this. Like, look how, yes, empowering and interesting, and the bonding that it's going to give me. And then I realized I was an atheist, and it's over. It was
Right.
over from there. But I did print many pages off of GeoCities and websites
Yes.
in the 90s of rituals and stuff. How about you, KT?
So I had the same kind of experience with it, where I saw it as, early teens, and was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And it's, written and directed by a man, but it has some very interesting like threads running through it, because and it almost has a little bit of a throwback to that Hays Code limitations, because there is that it always has to go bad, right? It's always there has to be the bad witch. But I think it twists the narrative in having the good witch win out and not have to die. And I think the thing that I like the least about it is the interfighting between the girls.
Yeah.
But it's a teen story, and
Absolutely.
I mean, what person hasn't gone through that with their friend group at that age? Like, that is such a like normal experience that it works really well, I think. And I think the special effects are super fun. Like, it's such a fun movie to watch and enjoy. Like, you get caught up in it. And that's something that it feels very 90s, but in all the good ways, all the best ways, you know?
Incredible soundtrack too. Like
Yeah, of
every,
course.
like
Bangers.
bangers
Yes.
all around. Yeah. And same thing for me. Like 1996, The Craft, seminal as well. I think it's seminal for many like women of our age groups who saw that film and were just like, wow, I can be powerful. I could have a group of friends who could be powerful with me. That is amazing. And like over the years, I've learned more and more about that film, knowing that like both Firuza Balk and Rachel True were both like practicing witches themselves, and also like they were part of the consultants on the film and helping to craft the religion of Manon, and to really kind of add that spin to it, which I really love because like as a practicing witch myself, I consider myself more of a chaos witch, where I kind of like I respect a lot of traditions and stuff like that, but I kind of use what it feels good for me, and not all the times it's not always not perfect. And like I use what I can with what's with me at the time, but it was so empowering to see like these all four of these young girls, you know, Nev Campbell, Rachel True, Firuza Balk, and Robin Tunney, like all their characters, all having their different struggles, and seeing how they were finding both through witchcraft that ability to empower themselves to trying to change the situation around them, as well as bond with their sisters. And I know that it's come up over the years about the problematic elements of the film. I think being written by a man. I think Andrew Fleming is a queer man. I remember hearing that a long time ago, but I'll have to double check that. But also the whole idea of the infighting and how at the end they just all break apart, and all of a sudden these women will never talk to each other again. It kind of plays on that whole like women can never really be friends. They're always just make catty and competitive with one another. And like you were saying there earlier, Katie, yeah, we've had that. We've had those experiences growing up, infighting among our friends and stuff like that. Don't want to kill each other, but
Right.
like never want to use the ability to wipe someone out completely. But it was like a film where like, wow. So if I, you know, especially as someone who had like an interest, who's always been interested in the other, and you know things that are not of this world, to see a film to have that, I was like, yeah, I want that. I want to be a part of that. And that kind of really just started me on my journey.
And how do we think it, how do you folks think it impacted? I know, again, a bunch of us were super young at the time, but like looking back, like, how do you think that it impacted the occult and witchcraft for folks that are actually like practitioners of said craft?
I mean, I've been on and off involved in the community, and I can't think of a single one who doesn't love this movie. who doesn't see this as like, yeah, it's got its issues, but I mean,
I love that.
It's so fun, and so it's like it's almost like a superhero story for witches, you know? Like it has this, it falls into those kinds of tropes, not in like not in what happens in the story, but in like it's these powerful figures, and there's a variety of them. You can kind of put yourself into one of these four women. So I think it's just, I think it did good things, and I think it definitely inspired more than one person to go and find themselves, you know, Silver Raven Wolves, you know, how to practice Wicca or whatever the first one is called. I know that was my first buy.
Yeah, looking for those books after, and like going to Kohl's or whatever local bookstore to try and find, you know, the next like, you know, how to be a witch, how to create a grimoire, how to do spells,
Right.
talking with your friends about it. And I think what was really great about the film too is we get positive representation of a Black witch, which I love Rachel True. Like, and I've loved her. I've come to love her more over the years as I've gotten to know her, like know her, like watching her on social media as she's gotten more involved in the horror community with her tarot cards, and like just listening to her. I listened to an interview that she did on, I think it was on the Witch Wave podcast, and you didn't see that. and we're still not seeing necessarily that. Like, I feel like that was like kind of like the first time we saw a positive representation of a Black witch, and then later on we haven't really seen much of that since. I know in 2021, the remake, the sequel to The Craft, they attempted to do that as well. They tried to bring in more representation and more characters and more diversity to Witchcraft. I felt that film lacked the depth of the characters that I wanted to see, just as like we got in the original film. But it was another attempt at diversifying Witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump into, I think, a topic that I think is going to create really great discussion. It's something that I'm really interested in hearing everybody's opinions on. And that is social media, Instagram, TikTok witches, just all of that sphere of things. Because as somebody who, again, is not a witch, but enjoys, I do follow, some witches and watch some things. I'm interested to see what you folks think about their impact and social media's impact on the witchcraft and occult communities. Because we know social media can be it can be a facade, it can show a lot of untrue things and people take it as face value without critical thinking skills. But for me, like, the stuff that I'm accessing, what it makes me think, again, as an observer and not somebody who's a practicing witch, is that it's all women. It's very expensive. Everything's very elaborate and ornate. And it's like you spend hours of your day doing witchcraft. It's just, I think it's interesting to me. So I'll start this over to Lisa. So with regards to social media, how do you think that whole sphere impacts the community?
Oh man. mean, I'll preface it by saying, like, I have a love-hate relationship with social media just to begin with. So even as we're talking, like, it's making me get kind of uncomfortable and twitchy, because every day there isn't a moment that I don't think about just deleting my presence on the internet. Like, it's a lot. Yeah. I love it because, and the reason I keep just personally, like, my social media is because there's a community. Because I've met so many of my friends, so many of my work colleagues, so many other writers or filmmakers or directors or whatever that I've met through social media, and I've fostered those relationships, and it's wonderful. And I think when you look at the, like, heart of the occult on social media, that's the good stuff, is that there is even a community to speak of today, because think about this. We are in the middle of a satanic panic. I mean, I really see that. I live in Tennessee, and there is a church who regularly burns books that they think are evil or occult. And I mean, I kind of laughed the last time they did it, but it was right when Toil and Trouble came out. And I was like, are they going to hear about my book? Are they going to know about me? Because it scared me, And, so that's like it's a real thing. And the satanic panic, when it happened, like in the 80s and early 90s, I mean, there were real people who were involved and got very hurt by it, whose lives were ruined. You look at, like, the West Memphis 3, for instance. But the fact that we can have an online, like, thriving community of witches is something we didn't have during that first satanic panic in the 80s and 90s. We have it now, and that's, like, a wonderful thing. But I do worry, because when you look at like TikTok, for instance, and you, like, scroll through some of those hashtags, there are so many people talking about it, and anybody can do that. Anybody can talk about practices. I worry about things like cultural appropriation. I worry about people, like, walking into closed practices that they shouldn't walk into. I worry about things like the availability of, like, white sage, for instance. That these things need to be talked about. So it's not like all wonderful, but I do think it's really important that we maintain that community, especially when there are people who actively want to shut it down. So very complicated, but
Yeah. How about you, Jess?
I also have a complicated relationship with social media. It's both, as Lisa is saying, love-hate relationship with it, where I love it because I get to see other people's lives and what they're doing, and you get to share that information, and like social media kind of allowed things to be a little more accessible, like information about various practices and stuff like that. But then you also run into the problem of misinformation, and how is that person using that information, and are they using it to harm other people? Because we get a lot of things online where, some people you're using the occult as a business, like they're building their businesses around it. And then you get people who try to create fake profiles and then try to scam other people. And that happens a lot. I've had people who would try and follow me on social media, and I would be like, okay, you look like an interesting account. I have a private account, and I would accept it. And all of a sudden I would get a message being like, would you like a tarot reading? And I'm like, not appropriate. Like, do not, I did not ask for that, nor should you be offering that, because that's like, in my mind, for me, a tarot reading is, for some people, a sacred practice, or it's not a card trick that they open up at party games or something like that. And for me, like, I, as a practicing witch, like to have like my, every so often I may share something on my Instagram about, like, an interesting reading that I had or something, but I like to usually keep things kind of to myself, kind of private, because that's kind of where I like to study and learn more and grow. But I also like to see how other people are growing and watch their journeys and see some of the information they're posting. I'm like, okay, that's in alignment with what feels right for me. But I also sometimes get very anxious and don't think that I'm a good enough witch. In the sense of, or like not even just a witch, like a practitioner of any, like, if you're something in the occult, like if you're involved in another alternative religion of some sort, that you're not good enough, that you're not, if you're not practicing every day, if you're not showing these beautiful centerpieces of, on your social media, and that that you're not actually a witch, because you're not. And to me, I was like, well, I have a busy life and I've got other things happening. So when I can do something, I feel really good in that moment, even though maybe a couple months before I go back and do another, like, rune practice, just something within my occult. And sorry, I kind of I get a little too overexcited, and then I start like repeating myself. But ultimately, just saying that it's like this love-hate relationship where it's good. It provides an online coven. It provides accessibility, but at the same time, too, though, sometimes it can make people not feel good enough and not feel good in what they're doing. And almost like competition, which is I hate. I hate when I feel in competition with anyone, because we shouldn't. We should all be uplifting and celebrating one another.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between. Like I don't TikTok. I do periodically, but I try to stick to cute cooking videos, especially that guy who makes old recipes. I love him. Dylan Hollis,
yeah.
I think his name is.
Yeah.
I love him.
Love him.
And cute animals. That's kind of like because I have an issue. Sometimes I get a little too into my social media. So that's one of like, no, I don't have time for this. I have, 2 kids and a full-time job and a podcast and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So it's like, so I only let myself have like Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. And the Reddit witchcraft community is very fascinating because it's not so presentative, or like a,
yeah, I get that.
It's more of a discussion where you are talking to other people and you're sharing. And sometimes it can be very negative, of course, because Reddit can get nasty. But I found that the witchcraft community in Reddit is usually pretty open, pretty accepting, and works against that kind of, monetization. And will call out things like the white sage and how to be more responsible with sourcing your ingredients for your spells or your rituals or whatever. And I found it to be a pretty positive place. It is definitely also a great place for young people. I don't participate in it as much because it does feel like a space for younger folks who are just dipping their toes in this. And there's a lot of support for people who are practicing in the closet because, have conservative parents, like for me when I was growing up, or, they live in a country, there's more than one post I've seen where they live in a country where they risk serious harm from the government for their practices, and they're getting support from Reddit in a way that they wouldn't be able to at all sometimes. So, and from what I've seen, the community is very gentle with those kinds of situations. So, and it is very affirming in, you don't have to, every solstice doesn't need to have a whole day devoted to it with specific rituals and 12 other people and blah, 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 blah. It's about uplifting people to practice in a way that is comfortable and works for them. So I have very much curated my social media about the occult and witchcraft to be a positive experience, because as I was growing up, it was such a limited thing for me because I grew up in a very conservative fundamentalist Christian household. So I was like, I don't want to have to deal with any negativity about this. I want this to be positive. I want to feel good about it. And when I see something, like if I see a post and I'm like, I roll my eyes at or something, like just keep scrolling, only engage with positivity around this and try to only add positivity when I'm posting, because otherwise it just feels icky and like it's not conducive. And I definitely do get that same like imposter syndrome of, is my altar look nice enough? Like one of my cats just cannot keep his butt off of it. And so it's just like, I get it all set up nicely. And then I wake up and he's knocked over the chalice and like moved the candles around. And I'm like, dude, could you just leave it alone? But and I just kind of had to accept like, well, the cat just wants to participate and that's okay. And just kind of let it go that it didn't look perfect.
Yeah, no, I love hearing these experiences because, again, me as an observer, hearing everybody talk about their experiences in their daily craft and whichever, again, it's very different than what so much we're seeing on social media, where it seems very rigid and time consuming and expensive. I think I bring up the expensive because I know how much a lot of this stuff is going to cost people. So it seems like it just is, you have to spend lots of money to be a witch. I know that's not accurate, but if I'm somebody who's interested, I'd be like, wow, I'm super broke all the time. I can't be a witch. I can't afford to buy all of these things, so it can be very, maybe I guess then misleading,
Yeah.
I need to go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, for some people, like, myself, it's been many years of gathering things here and there, and like, of like what feels right, but also just you can use whatever you want. Like it does, like, most of the time you just need a candle and your intention, and that's really all you need. And you, it can present, and you can present in that way. And it's not like I don't love seeing how some people have built this beautiful aesthetic, but then it does also sometimes make it feel like that this craft is just like the occult or witchcraft is just an aesthetic for people, when it's actually, I know for myself and for other people, it's a spiritual practice. And so sometimes I can get a little miffed when like I see someone just being so cavalier about it, and I'm just like, okay, well, you're kind of limiting my religion in a way. Like, I don't want to say religion because I feel that a very constrained word, but like my spiritual practice and the way I take on my day to day and show that I'm not a perfect witch, and I, that's okay too, and that's what I love about films like The Craft, because it showed that, like, right, it showed the different elements of getting involved in the occult, and how sometimes, having an altar with just like a bunch of pictures all over the place to help build your intention, like a collage of magazines that Nancy's altar I'm just talking about in the film there, that's as easy as anyone else can do that as well.
I think Terry Pratchett put it really well, and I know that's not a film, not yet anyway. Fingers crossed someday we'll get some Tiffany aching out there. But in those books, which are fantastic if you've never read them, he talks about the witches. All they need is a piece of string and an egg, and they're good, because you can use an egg for a lot of things, including breakfast. Like, it's his attitude towards it, even though I know Terry Pratchett was an atheist. is so very much what you're talking about, Jess. Like, so very much about you use what you have to hand and you make it work. And sure, I love going to my local Magus bookstore and buying myself a fancy, wonderful thing. And I let myself do that once in a while. But I try to make it a special occasion and spend the money and get something that I know it's like an heirloom piece rather than I'm going to buy 15 things off Amazon or whatever, which if that's your jam, no judge. It's just that's how I've grown up because I didn't have a lot of money and I didn't get to make it there very much. So every time I went, it was like, okay, I must find the perfect thing to add to my collection, even if it's a $2 crystal.
Yeah. I have a question for Lisa, because on with this social media and you were interested in pop culture and film representation. How do you feel that has also contributed to what people are seeing on Instagram, on social media when it comes to the occult, and like how like people present the occult and witchcraft in movies and televisions? Because I also feel like kind of like people were like, I want to have the practical magic house. You're like, set your expectation. You know what I mean?
Not very practical.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Speaking of like aesthetics, I feel like practical magic is like the perfect, what people want when they think of practicing, which, I understand that's a very cozy movie to watch. I don't know. When you think about, I feel like we've gotten much broader in our representations of like what the occult means and what witchcraft means. Because really, when you look at like film history and the representation of it, we tended to have like the Wicked Witch for a very long time. And it was either the Wicked Witch or it was somebody like Samantha from Bewitched who, was very like blonde and white and the perfect housemaker. And she was going to give up her powers for her husband. Or if she used her powers, it was going to be something that turned out wrong in some sort of way. She was always discouraged from doing, and there were a lot of, type of movies, but even when you think about, a lot of it was the evil witch, a lot of it was kind of the evil woman. And I feel like we have come a long way in at least complicating that idea. I do feel like, talking about the craft and talking about like Rachel True's character and how important it was to have this Black witch, even then her problem was racism that she was like overcoming,
Right.
like it was very much just, oh, well, we have a witch of color, so obviously she's going to have to take down racism in her life. Like she wasn't even given like the rest of the characters or another type of problem that she could tackle. And when I look at it, knowing, even though like it sounds crazy to say that 1996 was so long ago, it does not feel like it was that long ago. In my head, it was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know, but
right. Yeah.
When I think about how long ago 1996 was and how progressive like that felt, I would have thought we would have moved further down the line as far as different representations of witches. So we've still got a long way to go, but I feel like we're seeing a lot, we're just seeing a lot of different types of occult and witchcraft, which is nice. It's not all the devil made me do it. It's not all, evil. It's not, which is a good thing, but, I mean, I don't know. Even as I say that, I'm thinking of examples where it's the evil woman witch who's responsible. I mean, I think about something like The Conjuring, which didn't come out too long ago. Which, by the time I got to the end of that movie, I've never walked out of a theater like cursing the way I did.
Wow.
I was just like, why? Why are we doing that? But yeah, I don't know. I get frustrated thinking that we don't have more mainstream examples of
Have you
of that.
seen Chilling Adventures of Sabrina?
I have, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on how well that does? Because I personally, I think it tries to walk that line of having both evil and people just trying to live their lives. And then the younger sister's name, who's very obviously like a good witch, if you will. What was your interpretation of that show?
You know, I liked it. I mean, I like it did feel like it tried to do kind of walk that line, like you said. I thought the other characters, her friends, were much more interesting than Sabrina. And I wish
Yeah.
that had kind of been more the focus. But like I understand why it had to be her. But you know, even then, just kind of in service to like a devil character, I didn't
That was my
love. So
yeah, that was my biggest concern too.
we need to move off of this circle of
Yes.
Christianity.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
I thought Wednesday, actually, if you guys have seen that, that has its own issues. I thought Wednesday did a pretty decent job of kind of doing its own thing. Like how, and it still has that Puritan aspect, but I don't seem to remember it ever really goes into that devil dark side as the source of their power. You know, Morticia is the dove and Wednesday is the raven because of the differences in their personalities. And I thought we don't get a whole lot of it, but I thought the bit that we did get, I was like, I like this. I like how unjudgmental and how like positive this is trying to be in regards to witchcraft.
I really, yeah, and I like that you bring that up with Wednesday, because when we found out her ancestor is a witch, but with Wednesday and Morticia, it's more they're into the occult. Like they don't really, they never see them, they never say that they self-identify as witches. They're just like, we are involved in the occult. We involved in like you know, mysticism, mediumship, like all those elements that get to play in Wednesday, which I really appreciate, and which I love about the Addams Family as well too. And I like that you guys also talk about Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, because I tried to watch it and couldn't finish it because I was like, I'm enjoying it, but like, because I love the characters of Zelda and Hilda, but then when we were kept focusing around this idea that Satan is real and Satan is this all figure that all witches are subservient to and works for, I was just like, no, we are trying to break that message. We're trying to say that is not true. That is something that was made up by a bunch of white men a long time ago, who did not like women being involved in medicine and did not like women having power in their communities. And this is how all those witch burnings started so long ago in Europe. It was just another ways of saying what you're doing, natural healing medicine, is Satan's work, and now you must die. And so for me, as like when it comes to film representation, they often bring it back to Satan. I'm just like, a big sigh and being like, I understand the imagery itself is liberating and powerful, and that's why we have Satanists, and that's why we have, you know, the Satanic Temple and stuff like that, because it's just a mythology. It's just, but when it's constantly being connected to the occult and women again, once again, we have to keep fighting against people being like, well, no, that's not true. Just because I'm wearing a necklace that has a pentagram on it doesn't mean that I am evil or I'm going to hurt anyone or something like that. It just means that that's the symbol of, you know, earth, air, fire, and water in the circle for protection. Yeah, so, and that's why I was asking there, is that because I find on social media we see a lot of people trying to replicate what they see on TV and on films, and they're like, well, I saw it in this movie and it was so cool, you know, and Hot Topic coming out with all the clothing lines that are inspired by these shows, and you're happy, you're like, yes, more alternative clothing, that's great, as a little goth over here, but at the same time too, though, I'm just being like, but you're presenting an archetype that people who are practitioners are still trying to fight against. And that's what you bring up in your book, Toil and Trouble. Like from the very get-go, women who were being involved in the occult in any way, whether it was to fight for women's rights, fight against slavery and stuff like that, it was really just a means of empowerment for them to be able to have a say in the world, for people to hear them. And I think that was something that really comes out in Toil and Trouble, is how often these individuals were using this just to be heard. just to have someone hear them and listen to them and find some way to make change. And I feel like we're seeing that on social media, but once again, we're still sifting through the information and trying to figure out where is it landing that it's, feels right and no one's getting hurt by it. Because I feel like when we don't educate, when people aren't educated about this stuff and about our history, that's where where the harm comes from. And, Katie was bringing up earlier and saying with Lisa about, appropriating cultural practices, like using white sage for saging. And it's like for smudging your home, you're like, well, that's a Native American tradition. That's very sacred. We should be very careful with these things. So, yeah.
I'm just going to jump in. Yeah, no, it was excellent. I just quickly going to jump in. This is fantastic that there's 10 minutes left, and folks that are watching, if you have any burning questions for our guests, now is the time to send them in. And if we get some, I'll post them up. We'll talk about it. But yeah, just wanted to jump in and chime in for that. And since again, we're talking about decent representation, what else? What other like movies, films, or TV shows or anything along those lines, books, comics, whichever, do you find are good representations of the occult, of witchcraft, that maybe gives that general authenticity vibe that we love, again, from the craft, that made it feel so real and relatable, and something that, I could do, you could do, we could do this. What recommendations do you have for folks?
I mean, we're back in that time, or mid 90s, but I will say Willow on Buffy is like, and I feel like she's kind of for her character, and Joss Whedon is a terrible human being, just to have that caveat out there. But Willow and Allison Hannigan in particular, like, feels so inspirational, especially because she's not like gorgeous popular girl. She's just like a normal looking person who does her thing. She's a lesbian. Like, we get to see and she's funny. I love that about Willow, is that she's funny in both intentionally and unintentionally. So I think she was definitely #goals for me at that age. Like, oh, I want to be like Willow, because she was also very kind. I think that was my other favorite thing about her, is how kind she is.
Yeah, Jess is my Willow.
I'm
Faith.
You're 100% Faith. I feel very honored by that comment, because Willow's pretty badass.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good that's a really good example. This is a book, but as far as I think looking at the occult as a practice and kind of the good and bad and putting it in kind of a real life, is Tanana Reeve Dew's The Good House. Which
reading that for my book club.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has a lot of it kind of looks at it as like a familial practice and how it's passed down, and interactions with the community, with this kind of family's relationship to the occult. Again, the good and bad backlashes of that, but then just how it's passed down and the importance of it. I feel like that was a really, really good book in dealing with it.
That's great. Now I'm even more excited to read that book. Thank you.
Jess, we do have a question, but we'll finish this kind of idea off. Jess, recommendations for folks that are like good or decent, representations?
Two recommendations. Always, my favorite one, I love this film, George Romero's Season of the Witch. I love that film. It is so representative of just what women were experiencing in the 1970s. You got feminism coming out, movements, but then women they're looking for, and also too, mysticism was on the rise as we get like Wicca being more formalized. And so I think that's a really great representation, because it's also showing unconventional women, both the good and the bad. And then the other one was one I watched more recently that has really stuck with me. The film She Will. I really like that film because it brought together not just the earthly elements of not just witchcraft, because it's never really mentioned that it's witchcraft. It's like the occult. It's the witches were burned and stuff like that on that land, that is part of the story. But I like that it brings the history, and I think that's where I'm at in my journey right now is I want to know more about the people who came before, their history, and how they're coming, how we're bringing back that energy with us as we continue fighting forward to keep our rights as we keep continuing on and keep moving forward. So I think those are two really good representations that I've seen recently. Well, Season of the Witch I talk about all the time. So
yeah, so a new movie, yeah, because she will. I think it was like 2021 or 2022 or something, like very new.
Yeah. Very new.
Season of the Witch, 70s. I love new and old recommendations. Okay, so we got 5 minutes left. We have one question that's come in. And it is from Heather. Hey, Heather. How do you guys feel about Wanda from MCU?
That's a question. I mean, specifically the MCU Wanda, because I have different feelings because I'm a huge comic book reader. Love comics.
Take this away, Katie.
And the Wanda from the comics is very different than the Wanda in the MCU. I think the MCU really leans hardcore into the witchcraft side of things, whereas Wanda's a mutant in the comics, so her powers are not from witchcraft whatsoever. She still kind of dabbles in that kind of representation, but generally she's a mutant, and that's where her powers are coming from. So it is much more simple. I think it really is. I like it in WandaVision. I loved that show. I thought it was really fantastic. And I was mostly on board with where it goes in Multiverse of Madness. But it still has that dark connotation of her turning so dark and so poisonous. And that was kind of like, Wanda doesn't seem like that kind of character to me. And I don't know that Sam Raimi does a great job, but I don't know that he was the one to direct that, because he is naturally going to lean into that, because that's just, I mean, Evil Dead. Come on. That's just who Sam Raimi is.
Yeah.
Drag Me to Hell, that kind of thing. Like that's the world he likes to play in. And so because of that, I was like more forgiving on it, but I didn't necessarily love that choice for the character, because in some ways it just felt wrong for her to get twisted to be so dark. And that does not happen in the comic book world. Not that I've read anyway. Not that I've read all comics, because I have a life again.
Well, you know what interests me about Wanda and the MCU in particular? My comic book reading has not taken me to Marvel, so I don't know any of that world. And in fact, the only reason I watch so much Marvel right now is because I've got 2 little boys who are obsessed. So it's particularly one who was obsessed with Doctor Strange in particular. Like that is his favorite. And I love WandaVision when I saw it, just from a like filmmaking TV history standpoint. I loved the way they did the progression. Like, I loved that. So nothing about that. But the thing that really got me, besides the kind of dark turn that she takes, is her in comparison to Doctor Strange, who is also an occult practitioner and in the occult world. And this is something that we talked a little bit about in Toil and Trouble that I would love to do more writing on, is the gendered occult, and how anytime men are dabbling in it, and this is part of our history very much, because when you had like men like ghost hunting, for instance, or men looking into the paranormal, then they formed the psychical societies of the world, and they were very scholarly and they were very learned. And he's a doctor, he's Doctor Strange, and he's very much presented in that way. While when women do it, it tends to be they're presented in a home type environment. It's very emotional. It's very chaotic. It's very it's not anything that's presented as something that is like a scholarly or academic interest. And I think because of that, we we, being our culture and our history, has tended to put the men up on pedestals. You know, if Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, for instance, wants to talk about ghosts, you know, we're going to sit there and take it as like a scholarly subject. But if a woman is doing it, then she's, you know, kind of a little out there, or maybe even hysterical, and needs to calm down a little bit because she's not being logical.
My favorite example of this is Aleister Crowley.
Yes.
Favorite example of like, bro, who the hell do you think you are? Coming up in here with your feeling like you're superior.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly it. And I think that's what bugs me. You know, again, I've watched a lot of Doctor Strange because we watch it on repeat.
Same.
Here, but, you know, and that's what bugs me. So I'm like, why does he get to be the scholarly doctor with all the cool, like, you know, history objects, and she's the one who's got to go to the spiral down to the dark place? Like, that bugs me.
I am interested to see how they're going to do the Agatha show, because I love Catherine Hahn. She's so fantastic. And this is totally an opportunity for them to kind of break away and explore it a lot more, because this is coming from the mysticism side, the mystical side of the Marvel world. So you can get away from that devil and Satan aspects of it. So I'm really hoping that and Agatha Harkness is a practitioner of the occult in the comics. Like, she is Reed Richardson's nanny. That's how, and guardian for when he's small. So she has a lot of interesting aspects to her, and I'm hoping they explore that and don't go down the more negative paths, or continue down the more negative path with this.
Yeah.
Well, we're at our 1 hour mark, which is perfect timing to end this incredible discussion. So folks, I know we put up on your little tags here where we can follow you, some of us anyways, but if folks want to check you all out with your podcast and whichever, do you want to just bang out some of the social media handles and whatnot that people can follow and check you all out? I'll start with you, Katie.
You can find me on Twitter at KT_Schaefer. That's SCHAEFER, because everybody spells that name different. And that will have links to my podcast, Danger Close Podcast. Also, you can just search Danger Close Podcast, and we're the one that's about war films, not the other one. So,
thank you.
And that's a great fun show with 2 dudes on it who are super fun to listen to.
Oh, great. Lisa.
I'm on Twitter at LB Kroger, spelled just like the grocery store, if you have this in your area. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at lisa.kroger. Like I said, I have a love-hate relationship, so sometimes I'll post a whole lot, and then sometimes I just don't, but that's life. You can find the books anywhere. I highly recommend going to your local bookstore, or if you want to order online, bookshop.org, which supports local bookstores. And then, the 2 podcasts, No Fear Cast, it's KNOW. It's an academic look at the horror genre. And then the Monster She Wrote podcast, where we try to elevate women and non-binary creators in the genre. So find us anywhere you get podcasts.
Thank you so much. And Jess, well, we know where to find you, but there you are.
Everyone knows where to find me. You can find me at Spinsters of Horror on Twitter, Instagram, social media, Facebook, and, I Spit on Your podcast. And I definitely recommend people go to check out this book because, like I said, you don't just talk about witchcraft, you talk about the occult, and you get into things about skepticism in the occult and like literally the history, mediums, ghost hunting, everything. Like, so much I wanted to, I would love to do like a bunch of panels on the different topics that you guys covered on in this book. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
So thank you to all of our, I know I jumped in as the host, but our, thank you so much for being here. Generally speaking, once we'll do a big social media thank you and tag you all in it, but won't take any more of your time. Again, thank you so much and enjoy your day. And folks, thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.